We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schafter with episode 70. This was the season opener for the very last season. The title is Limited Engagement, so that gives away the plot somewhat, but not entirely. It first aired on October 8th, 1981. Mork and Mindy still aired on Thursdays at 8 o'clock, and it was followed for a while by the short-lived series Best of the West. The IMDb synopsis is very short. Mork proposes to Mindy. So, in a sense, the episode is about the proposal and Mindy's reaction to it, and they don't actually become engaged till pretty late in the episode, so it is limited in that sense, but also in some other senses. This episode was directed by Bob Claver, who started his directing career in 1963 with Ensign O'Toole. And he did mostly sitcoms, including 20 episodes of Welcome Back, Kotter. And he ended his directing career with 62 episodes of Out of This World, which was another sitcom with an outer space feel to it. In that case, it was about a teenage girl whose father was an alien who never actually appeared in the series and was just a voiceover, and she lived with her mother, who was played by Donna Pescow. In a sense, that series is a sequel to this one, although obviously not an exact parallel, and completely different characters, of course. This was the second of two episodes written by Brian Levant, who had previously done Mindy and Mork towards the end of the third season, so he definitely had a fix on Mork and Mindy's relationship, including some gender role reversals, which do come up here. We get mostly new opening credits. The theme song definitely sounds less disco-y than it used to. The clips include some recent episodes, noticeably this one, but there's still the thing of Mork trying to make an egg fly in the kitchen. One of the clips that shows Mindy has her at the TV station, and so I like that they're emphasizing her career even in the credits. We again see that it's also starring Comrade Janice as Fred, like in season 3, with that shot of him in the easy chair. Nobody else is mentioned, and as I talked about before, the supporting cast is mostly wiped out in season 4. Quite a few changes. Then we get some clips that show Mork and Mindy together, and these emphasize their hijinks at first, but then the emphasis shifts to their relationship, including their kissing. In some ways, these are the shippiest credits of the series. My guess is that that will change pretty soon into the season. The music has a more circusy ending than I remember, dun 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 dun, and that also happens with the closing credits. And I guess that is to suggest that this is a zany kind of show. In the clips from the season and on the episode itself, Mork's hair is notably shorter. I believe that Robin Williams had it cut for the filming of The World According to Garp, which would be released in July of the following year, but probably started shooting by the time that they were doing the filming for the beginning of season 4. There's a sunny daytime exterior of the house with flowers, and I'm just going to assume that this episode is set in the summer, probably not too long after the closing of season 3. There is a reference to time, and I'll talk about that when we get there. Mindy enters from the bedroom, and she's brushing her hair. She's wearing a light gray turtleneck, a darker gray blazer, and a black skirt. Her boots look brown or maybe maroon. As the audience applauds, she says she's got to go. She calls out to the attic for Mork to keep his fingers crossed for her, or whatever orcans do for luck. And I don't know if we've covered what they cross for luck. She's about to leave, but then she notices all the bouquets around the room. She tells Mork that the room looks beautiful. He yells down that there's not a single medfly in the bunch. This is a reference to a fruit fly, which was a serious problem in California from 1980 to 82. So, of course, they're in Colorado, but that joke is thrown in for the studio audience, of which I was one. We'll talk about that later. Mindy says, "Oh, Mork," as if she's really touched. He descends the stairs to applause. He acts shyly flattered, and and then he says, titter, titter, blush, blush, blush. She says, oh, Mork again, and then he says hi and giggles weirdly. She briefly touches his hand, and he reacts to her touch. She tells him that it's so sweet of him to do this for her, but it's a little premature. She's not going to find out about the news anchor job till the afternoon, but she thanks him. This is setting up something that isn't really carried through the whole episode, but does impact the first half, I would say, where Mindy is up for a big promotion at the TV station. Meanwhile, Mork is bubbly with barely suppressed glee and nerves. We know that something's going on with him, but not yet what, unless, of course, we read the TV Guide synopsis.
But thanks.
Mark, down, boy, down, boy. Me. Go ahead, tell her. No, I can't. Tell her. No, I can't. Oh, come on, tell her. Oh, I'm cramping up emotionally. Just tell her. You can do it. Just tell her it's all right.
Mark, I'm going to have to wait for the dramatic conclusion.
Oh, it's all right. Wait. Just tell her it's okay. It's all right. Mindy, you hold my 3 hearts in your 2 hands. Basically, what I'd like to say is, will you marry me? 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 The chicks are split.
Mork saying down boy to himself is a little bit suggestive, although it doesn't have to be taken that way. And there's another reference to him having 3 hearts, which she is holding in her 2 hands. He has trouble getting this proposal out, and I'm guessing that he's been planning this for a while and is just obviously very nervous. The audience really likes the line that the shiksa split, and of course that's another thing with Mork calling her a shiksa, which dates back to season 2. He makes a small mental note that it's always better to propose when Mindy is in the room. I noticed that she left the door open. It'd been a while since I'd watched the episode. I thought, well, maybe she hears this in the hallway and then slowly comes back in. But no, she didn't hear any of this. But it makes it easier for her to pop her head back in. He eagerly begs her to say the magic word because I guess he hopes that she did hear the proposal. She says roast, and she wants him to make sure to not forget to put in the oven. I think this is a little bit of a carryover from Mindy and Mork, that Mork is helping with the domestic side of things. And of course, that's not the magic word that Mork was hoping to hear. She exits again. He says, all that for a hunk of meat. He thinks he really blew his chance. A golf ball loudly breaks the window. Off screen, Exodore says, 4! Mork goes to the window and yells that this is not the American embassy. And I wasn't sure if this was like an Iranian hostage reference or just a general thing about American embassies being attacked. Exodore somehow enters the front door 5 seconds after his line that was presumably delivered out in the yard, which would be fine if Mork and Mindy lived on the first floor. But it's possible Exodore has powers that we don't know about. He's sort of in his usual outfit, but his robe looks shorter, and that shows off his yellow high tops. He's got a buzzard decal on his robe. I don't know why, just there. And he's got kind of a fisherman's hat, but the brim is upturned with what looks like kind of a tourist souvenir patch on the front, and he's holding a golf club upside down. The audience applauds, including cheers. He asks Mork if he can play through. Mork says, Exodore, is that you? So I thought that was nice because their thing was always that Exodore would say, Mork, is that you? So they're reversing that. Exodore says, that's what it says on my scorecard. We don't know who he's playing against, but somebody is keeping score. Exodore steps down into the living room and he says, try a 5-iron. Pepe, that's why you're a caddy and I'm on the tour. So Exodore thinks he's a golf pro, but more importantly, it is definitely the return of Pepe. And you may recall that during Exodore's marriage to Ambrosia, she and Pepe didn't get along. And so presumably now that Ambrosia is definitely out of his life, and we had some information about that in the previous episode, Pepe is back, now serving as Exodore's caddy. Exodore looks around the room and he says he likes playing this course. It's so well tended, and that's a reference to all the bouquets. The grounds are well kept. Mork says these are for Mindy, and Mork tried to propose to her. Exodore asks what she said. Mork says, put the roast in the oven. Exodore snaps his fingers and says, so that's where it goes. Exodore tends to be rather unaware of his surroundings and somewhat self-centered. So he did express some curiosity, but he doesn't want to talk about this. He wants to talk about his crusade, which is to take golf from the rich and give it to the poor. They'll play in the streets with real hazards, like gang violence and mopeds. There's always been a thing with Exodore in sports. In season 1, he worshipped O.J. Simpson.
Sir, you've got to help me, please. I mean, You know everything. I mean, you even know the color of Ronald Reagan's real hair. Please, please. How do I propose to Mindy?
Ditch the skirt, Mork.
Exeter, I love Mindy. Isn't marriage the ultimate commitment, the eternal bond, and besides a wicked tax break?
Sham.
It's a blessing.
It's barbaric.
It's fulfilling.
It's a candy man.
It's a breath mint.
Oh, stop. You're both right.
Exeter, please, please. Pull out your putter and drive me out of the sand trap of life onto the fairway of love.
Mork, there's only two ways to propose. B, the old-fashioned way. You charge into her life on a fiery white stallion. Toss the tomato on the back of the saddle and ride off into the sunset.
I guess the old-fashioned way is always best. Except when you're having a heart transplant, but...
Well, then you're stuck with C.
I don't mean to pry, but what's C? C?
Oh, C. Well, Mark, I must say that it's a boring choice, but it worked for Prince Charles.
And I look a lot less like Howdy Doody than he does.
This may shock and even nauseate you.
It's all right. I subscribe to the National Enquirer.
Bunny, I may not be the handsomest man, or the brightest, or the wealthiest man in the world, but I've got his phone number.
On the one hand, Mork must be really desperate to turn to somebody like Exeter for advice, but on the other hand, Exeter is one of his best friends. We know that Exeter's marriage didn't work out, but he did propose successfully, so I guess that counts for something. And we get another of the references to Ronald Reagan's real hair color. We get Exeter being sexist in a very dated way, calling Mindy a skirt and a tomato. They have this debate about marriage, and Mork is mostly taking the romantic point of view, although he does mention the tax break. Then they have the Candy Mint Breath Mint commercial reference to the Certs 2 Mints in 1 commercials from the 60s and 70s. Exeter has two suggestions. He skips over A, and it's just B and C. B involves a fiery white stallion, which Mork will interpret in his own way. The other one, Exeter thinks isn't as good, but it did work for Prince Charles. Charles had married Diana quite recently, especially probably at the time of filming. Their wedding was on July 29th of 1981. Mork thinks that Charles looks like Howdy Doody, and of course Happy Days had tons of Howdy Doody references because it was set in the 50s and it had two prominent redheaded young male characters, and in fact there's an episode where Richie enters a Howdy Doody look-alike contest. Then we get Exeter showing Mork how to propose, and this is sort of shippy, I guess, though Exeter does preface it with "this may shock and even nauseate Mork." Kudos to Robin Williams for not cracking up. I'm sure it was tempting during this scene. We get at least the second reference to the National Enquirer, and we find out that one of Exeter's suggested pet names is Bunny, which I could picture him calling Ambrosia, though he had stranger nicknames for her. There's a nighttime exterior of the house, and we see the Jeep pull up, so that's a sign that Mindy is coming home from work. Mork is in his usual dressy suit, including a red bow tie. He's practicing kneeling, and he has a red knee pad over his trousers. He goes to the window to check to see if she's here. He's obviously very nervous and excited, in some ways more than in the first scene. He kneels and tells himself, "On your mark, get set, propose." He leaps to his feet. Mindy enters in her outfit from before, so it's obviously the same day. He starts to speak, but she says sometimes she wishes she were the garbage man. She tosses her purse on the couch. She says when they wake up in the morning, they expect the world to stink. Again, there's always been this thing that like Mindy is upbeat and perky, but I think there's also this side to her that is very cynical and downbeat, although under the circumstances it makes sense. She's going around the living room and he's following her, sometimes on his knees, and she doesn't notice this because she's just upset about what happened at work. She goes in the bedroom. Mork is on his knees and says although they've only known each other for 26,802 hours, he feels basically, and then she comes back in. Yes, I did the math. That translates to 1,116 days and 18 hours. And that comes to 3 years plus about 3 weeks, because we've got part of a day, but there's also a leap day in there. This is set roughly 3 years after the series pilot, which is plausible. Mindy says she didn't get the newscaster job. And she says, but is she bitter? No. And obviously she's very bitter. Mork is again trying to follow her, partly on his knees. She says Mr. Sternhagen, and we know of course that Mr. Sternhagen is her boss at the TV station, said it had nothing to do with her being a woman. And then as she sorts through the mail, she says that he said it's just that he needed a shortstop for the station's softball team. She tosses the mail down and heads to the kitchen. We have Mindy experiencing de facto sexism on the job. She's upset about it, but there's not really things she can do. I thought the reference to the softball team was interesting because Gary Marshall always liked to form softball teams with his casts, or at least he did with Happy Days. I'm not sure if he did that as much with Laverne and Shirley. Probably not Mork Mindy. I thought that was kind of a vaguely Gary Marshall thing, although he had female players, of course. And Mork, I think, ordinarily would be sympathetic that she's having this career setback, but both of them are just so focused on what's most important to them in this scene, and so they're not really listening to each other. He says it's hard to propose to a moving target, and this is more comment to himself. She doesn't notice it. He runs into the kitchen as she gets a glass of water from the sink. He whistles to get her attention, but she doesn't notice. She says she's got to get her mind off this. And of course he has something that'll really distract her, but she doesn't know that. She suggests they go do something, and one possibility is tennis. And I guess you could play tennis at night, but it seemed kind of an odd suggestion. And then she says they'll do anything that he wants to do. He's run back to her side, and now he's on his feet. He says he'd love to play Space Invaders, go for some pizza, and maybe get married. Space Invaders came out in 1978, but really took off the home video game market in the early 80s. It's very appropriate for Mork because it's about space. He wants to go eat pizza, and that's, of course, something I associate more with Laverne and Shirley. And I don't know that we've ever had Mork and Mindy eating pizza. It doesn't seem like it's a big part of their diet, but obviously there must be some pizza place in Boulder. And perhaps the Da Vinci's serve pizza, although there's definitely no mention of them in this episode. And he throws in getting married, like they're just going to go do that this evening as well. But again, she doesn't notice. He sinks to his knees and she walks away. She says no, they had Italian food last night. So even though she said that they could do anything he wants, she's just in a really negative mood. And yeah, I figure they probably had Italian food at Da Vinci's, but not necessarily. Mork says she's cute, but doesn't have the greatest attention span. She's gone to the easy chair on stage right, and she sets her glass of water on the wicker table. She leans back, resting her head under her hand a little bit. He races over, but then he goes over to the kitchen counter. He tells a bouquet of, I think they were daisies, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you die. So he grabs one of them, and that's giving its life so that he can make this proposal. He goes back to the living room and kneels by Mindy's chair. He hands the flower to her with a cheeky grin. She smiles back. As she takes it, she says thanks. We can see a pin that says 31 on this blazer, and there's the same pin on the blazer that she wears in the later scenes. And that's, of course, for the TV station.
You know, I've traveled all around the galaxy, and I never thought I'd fall for an Earthling. And, you know, I don't think I know a nicer or kinder being than you. I love you very much. And, will you marry me? Min? Don't check out without the baggage. Min. 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 Little pooter. Min.
Hello, everybody.
What's wrong with Mindy?
I don't know, Grams. All I did was ask her to marry me, and boom, she's got the personality of lint.
Marry?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Marry my daughter?
Oh, yes. Thank you for your blessing.
Blessing? I'll give you a blessing.
You wouldn't have a man standing behind a woman wearing glasses, would you?
We have Mork saying that he never thought he'd fall for an Earthling, and in a way he had never really fallen for anybody before. And this in itself, I mean, the marriage proposal aside, it feels like there should have been some sort of transition between the season 3 last episode and the season 4 first episode, because in that closer he said he loves her and he talked about how important she is and how he wants to spend the rest of his life with her, but it wasn't quite falling for it. It's a kind of a fuzzy area that they do their best to work through in this episode. The difference between loving and being in love, and there's some shades within that, of course. When Mork first came to Earth, he had been raised as an orphan. He wasn't supposed to believe in emotion, and all of this was very new and exciting for him, and he learned about love from and through Mindy. Obviously that took him by surprise, but he's had time to get used to that. And I thought it was interesting that it's her niceness and her kindness that matter most to him. He finally manages to outright ask her to marry him, and she hears him, but then she freezes. She just cannot process this. She was not expecting this in the slightest, especially that evening. And that may seem strange that it never really crossed her mind, because there are hints in earlier episodes that kind of dance around the idea of maybe marrying each other someday. Mark has always been less in denial about his feelings. Once he feels them, he feels them, and Mindy has a harder time going that extra step. A lot of times she's saying that she and Mork are friends. I think that there are some light bulb moments in season 3, but nonetheless, she compartmentalizes, I guess. Mork says checked out without the baggage, and that's a Robin Williams catchphrase that we've had before. I think this is the first episode where he calls her Little Pooter, which is a pet name that pops up quite a bit in season 4, if I remember correctly. And then we get the entrance and the return of Fred and Cora. Fred had been in quite a few of the season 3 episodes. Cora was just in that one episode that marked her return after 2 years. It's kind of charming that it isn't a big entrance. It's kind of just ordinary. Fred is coming in with groceries, and there isn't, like with Exeter, hitting the golf ball through the window to announce his entrance. It's just family dropping by. Not remarkable to them. We see that Cora is now wearing glasses, and there's a line about that. And I don't know if it was just that Elizabeth Kerr got to the point of needing glasses, or wardrobe decided that that suited her better. I don't recall every single moment, because it's been about 43 years since I saw this episode tape, but I think I would have been very happy that Fred and Cora did come in, that they were part of this experience. I'll soon weigh in on it, the happiness of seeing them, because I really do like that family feel among the 4 of them. Fred definitely mellowed on Mork over time. Even before the end of season 1, he'd gone from being very hostile and kind of like Anne-Marie's father on that girl. His attitude towards Donald is definitely not as bizarre as Mork. The idea of Fred's only daughter living with a man. Fred, like most people, succumbed to Mork's charms, and he realized that Mork is a good person and cares about Mindy and means well, and is also just a really entertaining, fun, likable person. He makes Fred laugh. We saw some of that by the end of season 1. The little we saw of him in season 2. Be occasional sarcastic remarks, but mostly very genial, very friendly. And then season 3, there wasn't really any tension. But this episode shows that there is a line that Fred does not want crossed, and we will get into that. But in case he is very much not happy about this news, Mork doesn't immediately see that, because he feels like everybody should be happy that he wants to marry Mindy, and he is in for quite a shock. Literally, in the tag. As they cut to Mindy, who's still frozen, Cora says she thinks that we 3 should have a talk right now. And she seems to mean herself, Fred, and Mork, because Mindy is almost catatonic. She snaps her fingers to emphasize the right now. Fred says okay. Mork says they shouldn't neglect Mindy like this. So that's actually a hint that Cora didn't mean Mork, her, and Fred, but rather Mindy, Cora, and Fred. They start heading towards the bedroom, but then Fred turns and says honey and come on. Maybe it's her dad's presence or being called honey, but it kind of snaps her out of it, as does him grabbing her by the hand. She says hi, Dad, like she just was totally oblivious to her father and grandmother showing up. He leads her towards the bedroom, past Mork, who tells Pops that anywhere Mindy goes, he goes, because basically they're a unit. Fred closes the door on Mork because he does not see Mork and Mindy as a unit, unlike some of us. Mork says okay about being shut out, but since they're almost family, he can make one exception. The three relatives are going to discuss this in Mindy's bedroom. Mork is left outside. He snaps his fingers and then runs back to the counter. He grabs an empty glass and runs back to the bedroom door. He leans against the door, but he puts his glass to his other ear. So this is a play on how people apparently can eavesdrop with a glass to the door. I've never tried this, but it does come up on sitcoms. Then we cut to Mindy's bedroom, obviously right after this. And it looks different from before, although we never really saw much of it before season 4. For what will soon be obvious reasons, it is much more prominent in this last season. There's a lot of light-colored floral patterns on the curtains and the bedspread and the area rug. And just like in the living room, there are some plants. There's a closed brown door, and I'm going to assume that that's a closet, and then next to that is an open door. And we get a glimpse of Mindy's bathroom, and there will be at least one scene later in the season that is set in Mindy's bathroom, by then Mork and Mindy's bathroom. It has a blue motif, including the shower curtains. We can see a small white sink and the medicine cabinet. So that just added a bit of realism to the set, even though nobody goes into the bathroom, it is there. Mindy is sitting on the foot of the bed. She's looking at Cora, who's to her right. Fred is to her left, and he's clasping his hands, and he's obviously very uncomfortable talking about this. He says, "Now, honey, let me see if I can say this tactfully." He goes over to Cora's other side. He stutters that Mork is an alien. He's an extraterrestrial being. He's a UFO with legs. Insulting at the end, but he's not wrong. There's a cut to Mindy looking annoyed. Cora says, "Oh, pipe down, Fredzo." So that's very season 1 kind of phrasing. She says Fred doesn't mind having that alien sit on his television so he can bring in 20 extra channels. Fred says a television antenna is one thing, a son-in-law is another. To me, that sounds more like a satellite dish, like Fred is picking up early cable. Did present an interesting visual image. Mork going over there to help pull in HBO or whatever would have been around in 1981. We see that this is the line that Fred doesn't want to cross. He likes Mork, but he doesn't want him as his son-in-law. And Cora says, "Don't talk to me about his son-in-law." And so we're reminded that they had a very bickering son-in-law, mother-in-law relationship in season 1. Hints of that a bit in her return. And of course, Mindy's mother has been dead for over 15 years. Nonetheless, Fred and Cora have very much stayed connected through Mindy. Again, I don't know where Cora's living. I'm assuming she moved back in with Fred and now Kathy. Mindy stands and says, "Come on, you two," because she doesn't want them to fight and bicker. She's never like that. She admits that, all right, technically, they all know Mork isn't exactly human. And when I chose the name of this podcast, Becoming Human, it's sort of about the ongoing process of Mork gradually becoming human or human-like by living on Earth, getting to know Mindy and other friends, learning about our ways, and yet never quite becoming human. So this underscores that. And of course, physically, he is not exactly human because, for one thing, he has 3 hearts. Mindy says, but Mork has a lot more humanity in him than anyone Mindy has ever met. And so that's another thing, is that Mork is humane. He's kind. He cares. He is in some ways more loving and caring than anyone Mindy has ever known. And that's one of the things that she loves about him. Humans sometimes don't act like humans in that sense, but he does. And then she says that he's sweet, charming, and sensitive. So I thought that was interesting that those are the qualities that she likes. And they both like the sweetness in each other, the kindness, the sensitivity. That is part of their connection. They express it in different ways, but they are both very caring and loving people. It's really good that they met each other because, as we've seen in some episodes, there are people who want to exploit those qualities in them. And she also says that Mork is charming, and I thought that was interesting. We see that in this episode, that he charms her. He is funny and flattering, although also teasing and entertaining. So he's charming both in a Prince Charming kind of way, but also just he's a charmer. I feel like that was a little bit like when Pam Dauber in the Robin Williams biography talked about just how appealing Robin Williams was in person, that he had this charisma to him. And I think that as fans, it's a quality that we always notice, that he is charming. And that comes through in Mork in a different way. And then Mindy says that she loves him. We had the thing in the previous episode where after Mork said that he loved her, she said that she loved him. And that was a confession that she made to him and about him. And now, for the first time, I assume, she's saying this to other people. And it's two people that she really trusts. And that's another thing that's going on here, and why it's really important that we get Cora back for the balance of the show and also for this dynamic. That for so long, starting in the pilot, Mindy and her father were the main people who knew Mork's secret. There were other people, like I always felt like maybe Eugene suspected, but they were the only ones who knew that Mork was an alien. Other people just thought he was off. He was odd. Then Cora was let into the secret. She shared this burden and this privilege. These are the only two people that Mindy can talk to about this, and it feels different than if it was just her talking to her disapproving father. Cora is offering a different perspective. There are ways that her perspective overlaps with Fred, but I think that that rounds the episode and the scene out better than it would have been if Elizabeth Kerr had not been able to come back. Then Fred wags his finger and says Mindy loved Oliver too, but she got over him. She says Oliver was a goldfish, and he went belly up. In this episode, we hear a little bit more about the history of Mindy and pets, which is one of the tragic backstories of the series. She just always seems to have bad luck with pets, and even her teddy bear was very worse for wear. But she loved Oliver. I assume this was a pet fish she had as a small child. Fred, as her father, of course, is bringing this up. She asked her grandmother to please talk some sense into her father. And so at this point, we don't know what Cora's perspective is. We know that she differs from Fred, but we don't know what her take is. Mindy thinks that Cora is going to be an ally, but it's actually more complex than that.
Oh, Mindy, dear, we all love Mork. Yes, and we don't mind if he still likes to chase cars or sit on his face. But you see, you mustn't let love spoil your judgment. Mindy, any mixed marriage is rough, yes, but I'm afraid this one is impossible.
Mindy, look at the facts. Mork can never support you.
So I'll be the breadwinner. I want a career.
And what happens to your career if he's transferred to another planet?
I'll commute.
Mindy, think. Mork is an orphan, and he's aging backwards. You'll be on Medicare, he'll be on Pablum.
Dear, you will never be able to have a normal life. And what about having a family? The chances are you can't. Oh, Mindy, we don't like to see you cheated out of having something as precious as children.
Honey, it's your decision. And we just want you to be realistic. And sometimes that's the hardest thing in the world.
You know, I always thought my life would be like a Doris Day movie. Not Barbarella. How do I weigh what I feel against what I know is logical?
Honey, I think you know exactly what has to be done.
You folks talk a little louder. I can't hear a word you're saying.
This is going to be a lot harder than it was to flush Oliver down the toilet.
I think we've had references to Mork chasing cars before. Obviously, the city on his face thing is something that he doesn't do very much, but it is part of his historic quirks and something that Cora would definitely be aware of. Cora is an older woman. She's a widow. She is bringing that perspective to this. She is a warm person, but she's also a very sensible person, and she tells Mindy she mustn't let love spoil her judgment. That's not what Mindy is expecting to hear, but in a sense, there's a part of Mindy that agrees. And Cora calls this a mixed marriage. And I don't think she's saying that there should not be any mixed marriages, but she's saying that they are difficult. And obviously this has problems that an ordinary mixed marriage of race or religion or nationality wouldn't have. It's interesting that Fred has always been the more old-fashioned one, and he's worried that Mork can't support her. And Mork does have a job. He works at the daycare center, but obviously that's not a field that you could support a wife and possibly children on. Mindy is a feminist, as we know, and so her reaction is that she'll be the breadwinner and she likes having a career. The whole thing about her promotion has been forgotten, which is understandable, but it did bug me a little bit. I kind of wished not necessarily that she would get the promotion, but that there would be some sort of callback to that. And I don't know if later in the season they return to that. We may just have to take it as Mr. Sternhagen is sexist and there's nothing that Mindy can do about it at this point. And she's still very young, so she has time to move up in her career. But even without a promotion, she's probably making more money at the TV station, particularly since she's going to be given roles as a producer and an on-air personality at times. So she's probably making more money than Mork is at the daycare. And then Fred points out that Mork could be relocated because he has been assigned as an observer on Earth, but Orson might decide that he wants Mork to report from elsewhere. Mindy obviously doesn't want to leave Earth. She says she'll commute, but that's not a solution. That's a legitimate point to bring up. One thing I liked about this scene is neither Fred nor Cora is closed-minded. These are real, mature, genuine concerns. They're valid. It's not that they hate Mork or anything. It's not an all-in-the-family kind of situation where Archie and Mike had the very antagonistic relationship for most of the series. And Fred brings up, because Mork is an Orkin, he's aging backwards. Fred had heard about the Elder, but I think not actually met him, but he is aware of that aging backwards thing. Again, this is a valid concern, although my impression, and admittedly I've been struggling with this Bleem thing for over 3 seasons, my impression is they age backwards, but it's very, very slow compared to a human. I think it would be more a matter of Mindy would become old and Mork would still look like he was in his 20s. It's Cora that says Mindy will never have a normal life. And in a sense, Mindy hasn't really had a normal life since Mork entered it. In the first season, she talked about how she didn't really have a home until Mork, and she'd had many friends and a family that cares about her, but there was something about living with Mork that really made her life more vivid and interesting and important. And even with her pursuing her career, you kind of have to wonder, would Mindy have just gone on working in the music store and never gone back to college? Maybe living with an alien made her want to pursue journalism, even though, of course, she has to keep a lid on this huge story. But what Cora's talking about with a normal life is having a family in the sense of children. It may not even be possible. This being a show the kids watched and a TV show of its time, they are not going to get too explicit about this, but the implication is we don't even know if Mork and Mindy are physically compatible, and even if they are, they may not be able to reproduce. Obviously, Cora's concerns will take an ironic twist very soon, but at the time, that is a good point. And of course, the other thing is the aging backwards thing is going to play out in a very different way than what Mindy probably always assumed her child would go through. But even if Mork and Mindy had a normal and human child, that would still have its own challenges. And that is one of the things that comes up on Out of This World. Even though the alien father isn't present, what is it like to grow up being a half alien? They don't talk about that, but that could be a concern as well. Maybe Mindy isn't ready for that challenge. And of course, Evie on Out of This World looks like a normal human girl, whereas Mork and Mindy's child seems more Orkin than Earthling. But we'll talk about that when we get there. One thing we're seeing in this scene is that Fred and Cora really care about Mindy, but they also care about Mork. And they probably realize that there would be challenges that he would face that he's not ready for. And we will see that play out in the season. and particularly the earlier episodes, if I remember correctly. And Mindy admits that she always figured she would have a Doris Day-like life. Mindy was very young when the Doris Day movies were popular. I mean, I think she would have been a baby or a toddler, like, for instance, when Pillow Talk came out. But nonetheless, the legacy of the 50s was still an influence in the 60s and into the 70s, and in some ways into the 80s. Mindy, in some ways, had a pretty old-fashioned upbringing anyway. She had pictured that. Not the Doris Day of the single woman who has a career and falls in love, but I think more the domestic side of Doris Day, like in the movie Please Don't Eat the Daisies. But in case, Doris Day had a very wholesome image, whether she's playing a married or single character. And Mindy somewhat relates to that. And Barbarella, of course, is the sci-fi sex comedy that Jane Fonda made in the late 60s. I would say the most Barbarella-ish episode of this series is the one with the Necrotons. Not as bizarre as Barbarella, because Barbarella is very bizarre. Obviously, Mindy's not going to turn into Barbarella, but she's just making the joke about having a sci-fi life instead of a suburban, wholesome kind of life. There's this battle going on in Mindy, and it's represented here by Mork versus Fred and Cora. It's feelings versus logic and common sense. And how do you weigh that? Mindy, I think, has always had that aspect. I mean, she's a very sensible person, but she does have her more romantic and emotional sides. And her feelings for and about Mork are very strong, and now that he has proposed to her, he's put it into a yes or no kind of situation. And she, we learned in this episode, just kind of wants to float in the status quo. You know, maybe things will develop slowly. But now Mork, and to some degree the show, is saying fish or cut bait. You've got to decide. And there's this pressure on Mindy, internal and external. And I really feel for her. I think that's something I wouldn't have got as part of the studio audience at the age of 13, this conflict that you can love somebody, but they're not necessarily somebody you should marry. I was a huge Mork and Mindy shipper. There really wasn't anybody I shipped so hard at that time. I mean, Jack and Janet on Three's Company to some degree, but they were presented as less of a couple, and it was more of a, there's something there. Mork and Mindy's relationship has always been a vital part of this series. I do vaguely remember being very excited about that, going to see one of my favorite shows, and then this happens. Oddly enough, I was also in the studio audience for a very early Mama's Family episode where Vint proposes to Naomi, and I had no emotional investment in that then or later. They had different barriers. But this was a big deal. This was a super big deal, and I think I would have been really rooting for Mork, for him to win out, to woo her. I might have been sympathetic to Mindy, but, I didn't care about whether they couldn't have kids or whatever. I just wanted them to be together and to spend the rest of their lives together. I've said before, I view this episode with multiple layers of perspective. And then watching it at home, of course, weeks later, maybe a couple months later, I hear the studio audience going crazy in some of this. Some of it's just, hey, this character showed up and we love them and we're going to applaud and whistle and so on. And I was part of that. It can be a very magical thing, seeing a TV show you like taped. I mean, even going to a TV show you're like, about. It's still fun. I was super invested in this. And I couldn't have known walking into the studio what I was about to see. And I have more to say, but we're not quite there yet. And of course we find out that Mork didn't actually hear any of this conversation. And that would probably shape the episode differently. He wants to eavesdrop, but he just doesn't know how. And we will find out that he can be pretty darn sneaky. Next time on Becoming Human.
Seymour, sometimes in life, no matter how much you dream or you wish for something, it just can't be. I guess what I'm really trying to say is, I can't marry you.
We'll just take some time, I mean, just 24 hours. Oh. Please, Min, please, oh, please, oh, please.
All right.
Tell you what, it's 11:59 now. Tell you what, just because I like what you stand for, even when you're sitting, I'll give you the extra minute. We'll make it midnight tomorrow night.
Okay, but I can't promise anything. What are you doing?
Come in. I'll come to sweep you off your feet.
Oh, my God.
top hat, got my best dress. All I need now is the girl. Got my striped tie, got my hopes. I got the time and the place, and I've got rhythm. All I need now is the girl to go with.